Okay, we're up and running. All right, so first of all, before I forget, we are going to finish chapter 4 tonight, I'm sure, but we will not start a new chapter because I'm not going to be here next week. Oh. So because next week we're leaving a bit early for the Israel trip, me and my family. So we're leaving on Thursday, which means Wednesday I have to finish packing, at least Wednesday night. So that means we won't have class next week, and then we will not have class again until the week of July 16th, I think will be the next. No, the July 17th, I believe, will be the next class when I return. So that just want to make sure that public service announcement was out there right at the beginning before I forgot. So no class next week, and no class until July 17th. I'm almost certain, the Wednesday of that week. And that means we have to really make sure we finish chapter 4 because we don't want to leave anything hanging between now and like a month from now. Good? Good. All right. So chapter 4, we are sort of switching gears a little bit to deal with issues of a ketubah that wasn't written, or a ketubah that was written inadequately or without as many stipulations as you might have expected. Now remember, the ketubah in its classic form is meant to be a promissory note, literally as a debt, that the woman can collect upon either divorce or upon the death of her husband. But that promissory note is often very unique. That is to say, the husband and the wife, or their families, depending upon their age, negotiate the terms of this promissory note. But what happens if not every basic stipulation you might imagine gets into the text? And is it really only the text that's there, or do we make assumptions beyond the text based upon community convention? So that's going to be our thrust for the next few, and we'll talk about why the convention is what it is. All right, so back to you, Richard. Penelope filled in for you last week.
Oh, that's right.
So we're on chapter 4, Mishnah 7.
If he did not write a ketubah for her, a virgin still collects 200 zuz and widow one name.
Money.
Money.
Yeah, that's one of those great Hebrew words that looks like an English one.
Yes, because there's a condition laid down by the court.
All right, so we're going to have two things very important here. One, I want to talk about the general principle, a condition laid down by the court. This is, in the modern equivalency, sort of a fundamental right? A fundamental expectation that even if not stated, is enforced by the court as though it had been stated and agreed upon.
It's like the minimum requirement.
Exactly right. So you can call it a minimum wage if you were getting a salary, but in this particular case, it is at a minimum. If you're making a ketubah, this is what you're going to give for both a virgin or non-virgins of these other types. And even if you didn't write a ketubah, like you got married without a ketubah, and you go to divorce her, you can't say, well, I didn't give her a ketubah, so I guess I owe her nothing. Doesn't work like that. The court says, we have mandated that this is the minimum upon divorce. You can go higher, as we'll talk about, but you can't go lower, and you certainly can't go zero. Make sense? All right, so that second part that I wanted to mention is the idea that even if you didn't write the ketubah, there is a assumption, a binding assumption by the community that you are getting married Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael, according to the laws of Moses and of Israel. And as the rabbis interpret that second part of that phrase, that means you are being married according to the laws and customs of the community. So if the rabbis say this is what it means to get married and then subsequently divorced, that's what it means. And it doesn't matter whether you said it, whether you signed it, whether you agreed to it verbally. If you got married and you're Jewish, you're bound by this.
I have a quick question. Is the ketubah so important? Because I know it kicks at death.
Or divorce.
Or divorce.
Right.
Right. Did they not have wills, just out of curiosity?
They did and they didn't. So a person could dispose of their the wealth before they died as they wished. And a person could make certain gifts after they died through a will and stipulation. But the ketubah was a guarantee that you would not be surprised by what the will contained or didn't contain. So yes, absolutely, the husband could bequeath or give his wife a huge gift right before he dies. Before I die on my deathbed, have this giant bag of gold. No problem. Absolutely good. Everybody would have to honor that. On the other hand, he might not do that.
Right.
And that was the whole point of the ketubah in the first place. Remember, prior to this, because of the basic law of the Torah and the social structure that people lived in, women had no expectation, or they had no legal expectation of compensation in the case of divorce or compensation in the case of being made a widow. And the rabbis said, we will have a ketubah so that that won't happen.
But he could leave his wife everything after his death?
Not exactly. So the main thrust of inheritance went according to the sons.
Right.
But as we're going to see, there are some special circumstances that can change that as well, when we're going to get there tonight. All right, so that's part one. Even if you don't write it, you still owe this minimum. However, part two.
If he assigned to her in writing, a field was worth 1 money instead of 200 zuz, he did not write for her. Quote, all property that I possess is a lien for your ketubah, unquote. He is liable for the full amount because it's condition laid down by the court.
All right, so when you're writing a ketubah, you are supposed to say that all of my property is held in lien against paying you your ketubah, which basically means that you have a claim on everything. So if I owe you 200 zuz, the standard prices we just talked about, or standard amount as we just talked about, then if I don't have 200 cash, I have to mortgage my property, I have to sell my property, I have to take out loans against my property in order to pay you 200. I can't just say, no cash, sorry. It actually has to be produced. What this is saying is that if he said, I have your ketubah secured by this field, meaning that if I have to pay your ketubah, I will sell the field and give you the proceeds, but that field is only worth 100, only worth a money, half of what is actually expected, that doesn't matter, right? Yes, he has to sell the field, and he still has to sell other stuff to finish the rest of the gap. So even though he only stipulated something that was worth half the value and never explicitly said the rest of his property was subject to being used to pay this off, the rest of his property is subject to being used to pay this off. So again, it's trying to disclose those loopholes to prevent either somebody who was ignorant or unscrupulous from not living up to the community expectation of taking care of either his divorced wife or his widow.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Those moments, since people are not happy with each other.
Yeah,
it's difficult.
during divorces, which some can be amicable, and indeed the Talmud talks about perfectly amicable and friendly divorces where it's just they need to go separate ways for a variety of reasons. Sometimes even they don't want to be separated, but they're going to have to. There are other divorces that are not so friendly, and that's definitely where you do not want to leave one party at the mercy of the other party. When you create an imbalance of power like that, at those moments in particular, it's when bad actions happen. All right, Ketubot 4:8. Yep, your turn.
That he did not write for her, if you are taken captive, I will ransom you and take you again as my wife. Or in the case of a priest's wife, I will restore you to your people. He is liable to carry out these obligations because it is a condition laid down by the court.
Okay. You might not be able to imagine this, but please work with me. Remembering, of course, that in the ancient world and even in the classical world, all the way up really until pre-modern times, the relationship between husband and wife was often a semi-economic connection rather than a love relationship. Someone at the door?
Yeah.
Okay. Need to work on our timing. We'll pause for the return. I don't want to punish our door opener. Marriage used to be different.
$1,000.
Yeah.
What is the money?
Yeah. Not $1,000. The money was the half the equivalent was 100. Yeah.
So what is 100 zuz?
Yeah, exactly. What is 100 zuz? or what is the ketubah for a divorcee or a widow?
Right. And if there is, what is?
But that would be the answer to what is 100. What is a
Yeah.
mane? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a mane. I heard there's been a lot of drama on Jeopardy
Oh,
recently.
yes.
Yeah, I haven't watched it, but
There's this guy named James Holzhauer.
Yeah?
You got caught cheating?
Who was, no,
Oh.
I expected him to be, but
He just powered through it. I heard.
Yeah.
He's just
just
raking in the
some, yeah.
and raking in the back the money.
$2 million.
Wow.
Somebody,
It's nice to reward cleverness.
Yeah,
Somebody said somebody got caught cheating on Jeopardy.
Really?
That's what my dad said, but I never actually confirmed it.
I hadn't heard that. How long does it take to open the door?
See, we don't get out of the car right away.
What's that? Ugh. Hopefully they're being given gentle tochacha, gentle rebuke about A, if you arrive late, you get out, and B, don't get to come late.
oh, he was coming out.
Took a while to get the door open for someone.
Yes, sir.
The parking lot's not that big. It's you just park closer to the door next time. All right. So, as I was saying, remembering in antiquity and really up until the pre-modern world, marriages were often, next topic for him, please. The next marriages were often about economic interests as well as romantic interests. And yes, people did love each other, but they also had to look at their assets and wonder what would happen in different circumstances to their ability to provide for themselves, their children, if money was disappearing. And one of those places money could disappear was called a ransom. If your spouse was taken captive and they were demanding a certain ransom to release them, and you had no expectation that the government was going to help you in this, or it could be the government demanding the ransom, because there have been many oppressive governments that have ruled over us for many, many thousands of years, then I love you, honey, but I can't afford the ransom. Or just affording the ransom would be a problem. I'd have to, mortgage this part of the field, or I'd have to sell the house, or I would have to cancel my trip, my vacation. So the question is, if he didn't say in the Ketubah, if you are taken captive, I will pay your ransom, then does he have to pay the ransom, right? Or is that something that every bride should make sure that the groom writes it explicitly in, right? And the answer is, even if he didn't write it, which means therefore he didn't explicitly agree to this, it is a community standard, and when he got married according to the laws of Moses and Israel, he is bound to pay the ransom to rescue his wife. Now, if he can't afford it, that's a whole other issue. But if he can't afford it, he must pay it, and the court can even take the money from him by force if necessary to pay for the ransom of his wife. The reason why we have the Kohen as a second stipulation here is because, as we've talked about a few times before, unfortunately in the ancient world, a woman gets taken as a prisoner. She is taken captive. There was no Geneva Convention, no fair treatment of prisoners, and almost certainly she would have been raped. And as we've talked about, a priest is not allowed to maintain his marriage with a woman who has been taken by a different man. And therefore, his stipulation cannot be just pay the captors and she comes home. His stipulation has to be pay for her release and to make sure she can get back to her family's home, right? Because she's not living with him anymore. He still has to pay her train ticket, so to speak, so she can go back to her father's house and still live in a home that will support her.
That's what they call it only.
And that's for the Kohen only, yes. Now, it is, of course, permissible for a man after this to also divorce her, but he doesn't get to divorce her before he's freed her. He still has to free her, and then he can divorce her if he wants to for whatever reason.
What if he wants to keep her? He can't do it?
Yes, he can. Yeah, he can keep. But a priest can't, but a regular Israelite can.
But if he wants to do it, then he can't do any priestly duties?
Oh, no. A priest cannot, regardless. Period.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a good situation. Okay. 4-9. We're cruising along now.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yep.
I need to do this.
Well, I'm always allowed to say I'll answer that another time. But
So if somebody keeps them because they owe them money, then the priest can go back. But if they just take them hostage and ransom them back, then they can't go back, right?
so, as we talked about before, if there is reason to believe that the person was not raped, if there wasn't any defilement, to use the terminology that was used in earlier Mishnah, then if there is reason to believe that there was no defilement, then yes, she can return to her husband. On the other hand, if we have no reason to believe that there was any protection to her from that, then no. So if it was a question of if it was a non-Jewish captor, pirates take her, bandits take her, whatever, then we would assume that she had been raped. On the other hand, if there was a good belief that they would only keep her unharmed because of the arrangement they had with whoever the husband was, then we might be able to say there probably was no hanky-panky.
So I thought like there was something like if you owe me money, so I hold somebody captive because you owe me money. I think it's usually a daughter. But
Right. So there are ways of not exactly ransoming, but of indentured servitude for like a daughter, where you need to pay off a debt, and so you literally sell, but it's not actually sell because it's not like their property. But there are requirements that they can't be treated as a concubine under those kinds of circumstances.
wives were never indentured servants, right?
No, you didn't sell your wife to some other guy under any circumstances. That was not really your option. You could sell her labor, meaning you could like say she's going to make 5 pots for you and sell the pots, or she's going to weave a rug for you and sell the rug, but you can't sell her.
Yeah, not just when non-Jewish people just took them if you owed them money.
Well, I'm sure they did, but that's called taking someone captive.
Oh.
All right, 4-9. Let's move to more captivation, more captivity.
If she was taken captive, he's obligated to ransom her.
As we talked about before, regardless of what he wrote in the Ketubah, he's obligated.
And if he said, here is her get and her ketubah, let her ransom herself, he's not allowed to act accordingly.
All right, so here's one, loophole you might have thought existed. And remember, every time you might have thought, it means you're wrong, which is the husband says, well, they're asking for 100 zuz for her ransom, and her ketubah is 100 zuz. So, well, 2 birds with 1 stone. I'll divorce her, which means I owe her ketubah, and then she can take the ketubah money and give it to the captors, and now she's free. So what's wrong with this picture?
She has nothing to live on.
Exactly. He's just done like 2 birds, 1 stone, literally, so that he's paid the ransom and her divorce settlement at the same time, and he only had to pay one of them rather than having to pay both. And so this is very clever and very wrong, very not only unethical, but also against the community standards. So he is not allowed to divorce her and in the process pay her captor and her at the same time. That is not permitted. Right? And you might have thought that it would be fine, because once he's divorced to her, he has no obligation to her. And the community says, no. However, the next one is probably going to cause some more aggravation.
If she was injured, it is his duty to provide for her medical treatment.
All right, so your wife gets hurt, your wife gets sick, you have to actually pay to make her better. Now, I know you're all looking at me like, well, yeah, but this is not a question of your ethical responsibility. I should point out that all of the commentaries say that it is your ethical and moral responsibility. The question is whether it is your legal responsibility. And I will tell you right now in this country, it is not your legal responsibility to pay for the treatment of your spouse. All right? If your spouse gets sick, you are absolutely within your rights to decide, I don't want to use my money to pay for their medicine. And
especially cancer treatments and stuff like that, I've seen that a lot.
And it's a very, very difficult situation to be in. But here's another loophole.
And if he said, here is her get and her ketubah, let her hear herself, he is allowed to act accordingly?
Yes.
Seriously?
Okay. Well, seriously, with some mitigation. All right. So the commentators swoop in on this along with the Talmud in order to try and structure this in a way that I think we'll find a bit more ethical. So let's deal with the basic case here. There might be a case where she is injured or sick, and he says, well, you're not really useful in this state, so I'm going to divorce you. And when I divorce you, I have to give you a ketubah, and now you get to take care of yourself, right? And that means you buy your own food. It means you also buy your own medicine and pay your own rent and do whatever you want to do with your ketubah. Not my problem anymore. Now, again, as I already mentioned before, all the commentators, all of the sages throughout the centuries have said behaving like this is reprehensible. However, they also try to explain that this case of divorcing a sick woman and letting her pay for her own treatment out of her ketubah only can be done if she is able to move under her own power. Meaning to say that if she is bedridden or what we might call in modern English, if she is seriously ill, rather than just as mild to severe asthma, then the husband is not allowed to behave in this way. That he's only allowed to behave in this way if she could continue on her own and deal with her illness through her own means of support from the ketubah. Then yes, we can't prevent him from divorcing her as long as he pays the ketubah, etc., etc. But if she is in bed and she is sick, you can't walk up and say, "Oh, I hope you feel better. Here's your get." No, if she's bedridden, then you are in there for the long haul, buddy, and you will have to take care of her and pay for her to get better and all of that. And then if you want to divorce her, fine. But as long as she is unable to take care of herself, you're not allowed to kick her out, even with the ketubah. Make sense? Okay, but like I said, the Mishnah doesn't explain that as very strongly, which is why the commentary and additional analysis of our sages is very important. All right, 4:10. We may finish early tonight.
If he did not write for her, the male children that will be born from our marriage shall inherit the money of your ketubah over and above their shares with their brothers. He is nevertheless liable, because this clause is a condition laid down by the court.
Okay, welcome to Confusing Terminology Class 201, which is to say we have the word ketubah, which for all these 4 chapters we've been talking about as being the promissory note that was arranged between the husband and the wife before they got married for her to be paid in the event of divorce or his death. That is not the meaning of ketubah in this Mishnah. In this Mishnah, and actually Natan brought this up last week, and I wish he was here today so I could give him the explanation that I said I'd give him next time. This ketubah in Mishnah 10 is talking about what is more classically referred to in English as a dowry. A dowry. Dowry, yeah. It's a great old English word that we don't use anymore except when talking about old books. It's not exactly, depending upon what British country, or sorry, what European country you're from, what a dowry could be. In some places, a dowry was literally the money you gave to the husband for taking the woman off your hands. It was almost like bribing the guy to get married to your daughter. In this particular case, dowry is wealth or property that is considered to be attached to the woman, but for the benefit and use of the happy couple and for the husband, but which is supposed to continue through her line, through her family. And so that's where this question of children comes in, which is to say, if I have my first wife and she has a dowry of 50,000 zuzim, massive dowry, and she dies, and then I remarry, and the next woman has a very tiny dowry, but the first one I had 1 kid, and the second one I had 9 kids, and then I die. Normally, if I have 10 sons, I divide my inheritance into 11 portions. I give 2 to the eldest, and then I give 1 to each of the other ones. And if I were to divide up my 50,000 zuz plus whatever else I had, they would each get a portion of that 50,000 zuz.
Even though,
But not in this case, right? In this case, because the 50,000 zuzim was part of the dowry of the first wife,
then it's-
that is stipulated by the whole community, even if you didn't put it in writing, that will only go to her son. So that first son is going to get a giant check, and then everything else that's left will still be divided evenly and split among the different sons. So he still gets his regular share of his dad's inheritance, but he gets 100% of his mom's inheritance. And that is something that you could imagine how it would be very important to her family that they wanted the money that they were investing in this new couple, this new partnership, marriage we call it, to go for her benefit and the line of their grandchildren, not someone else's grandchildren. You may have noticed that in-laws are not always as fond of the son-in-law as they are of their own daughter. Because the daughter's their child, the son-in-law is the guy who married their daughter. And so they wanted to make sure, as everyone I think rightly would, that the money they're investing in this couple goes to the part of the couple that they love most, meaning their actual daughter. And so that's why this is a community stipulation, regardless of what husband and wife actually verbally or written agree to.
This goes back to the earlier Mishnah that says the husband's entitled to the yers effects, but not
Yes.
the property itself. Right?
Exactly, right. He can have the fruits, but not the actual orchard. And that would be an example of this. If there was an orchard that came as part of her dowry, then that would go to her kid or kids. It would not go to any of his other kids that came later on. And it would not be included in the calculations of his property when his property was being divided among the heirs. Exactly. Good? Good. So, yeah, you think marriages are like complicated now? And, you know, who's paying for the reception and who's paying for the honeymoon and all? You think, trust me, when marriage was a matter of economic life and death, and there was so much little different pieces of property that families had worked centuries to try and build up in order to give stability to their life, they fought tooth and nail to make sure this was fair.
You know, that's why during that season, I mean, they would marry someone that was they thought would be a good person, you know, to deal or avoid all this drama. I mean, you can imagine the complications.
You would think that you'd always want to marry someone that you would never have to worry that they might make a decision different than what you think was the right thing to happen. There's a few problems with that. One, you don't often have a lot of choice. I mean, nowadays, you know, even here in Orlando, which is not exactly the center of Jewish life in America, there are, for most people who are in the marrying age, probably maybe 1,000, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, of people who are eligible candidates for that person. That's a lot of selection compared to what most of history has given us. And if you were in a bigger city like Los Angeles, Baltimore, a Jewish bigger city, Baltimore, New York, you'd have tens of thousands, if not more, of potential options of who you might marry. So you can really be selective and find just the right morally compatible person who would be perfect for you. If you have a village of 200 people, how many of them do you think are of the right age and gender for you to get married to? 4, maybe? And that's, with a wide net of, she's 13 and he's 40, or maybe the other way around. It's hard to find a good match. And so you had to make sure that the match wasn't just as good as you could make with the ethical character qualities, but that it was as good as you could make with both the legal protection and the economic benefits that would allow your kid to not starve to death. Because that's what every parent wants to make sure. Yeah. Nowadays, we say we want every kid to do better than us. Yeah, sure. I just want my kids not to starve. That was what a parent worried about 400 years ago. Is please don't let my kids starve. Let me marry them to somebody who will work hard, provide for the family, and they'll grow to like each other and be a partnership and maybe even feel something more than that for each other. But that alone, that would be enough. That would be enough. Good. I want to make sure that people do understand that romantic love was a thing, absolutely, and people aspired to have that kind of passion in a relationship, but they also aspired not to starve to death, and that was kind of job one of making sure you could have a happy life. And we take that for granted, and sometimes that makes us a little bit spoiled. Okay, so now we are on Ketubot 4:11, another similar type theme. And we are back to this side of the table, right, Richard?
Okay, right. If he did not write for her, the female children that I will have from you will dwell in my house and be maintained out of my estate until their date of marriage. He's nevertheless liable because this clause is a condition that he's out there.
Okay, so again, we're talking about the estate, which means after he has died. And we talked about a little bit before that she would be maintained by her brothers. But the stipulation here is that they're by her brothers, meaning they're by the people who inherited from her father's estate. And technically, he could have not written this in, or technically her brothers, which remember could be from a completely different wife, could not care less about what happens to her after her father dies. This is, the Cinderella story. Where it's the brothers who inherit from a different mother, and then they're saying, well, we don't want you left around the house, get out. And the stipulation is, no, the community agrees, you get to stay in your father's house until you get married. And that means you get food, and you get a roof over your head, and you get, clothes. Doesn't have to be, fancy Rodeo Drive and all of that, but you do get maintained as long as you're single.
I think the older we get, I don't know, but at least the less materialistic we get.
One hopes. One hopes.
Some people have noticed that they just be happy with just having a roof over their heads, a job, a happy, comfortable life. Well, when I was in high school or college, it was you have to have a Mercedes, you have to have this, you have to have that, and it was totally different.
Well, unfortunately, for a lot of us as we're growing up and we're children and we look at the world in simplistic ways, even though we think we're so wise when we're 15, we're really idiots, but we think we're smart. We see people that we think look happy and look comfortable, and we look at what they have, and we think that must be the secret to what it is to be happy and comfortable. So, oh, look, he's not worrying and tearing his hair out about, the bills and all of that. So I want what he has. And rather than just saying financial stability, they mean, I want the Mercedes, I want the giant house, I want the fancy vacations and the clothes and the jewelry and the Rolex. And they don't realize that those things don't actually make happiness all that well. And they can create all sorts of new stress. And you don't know what stress is going on in the mind of that guy who has all of those things and may be more afraid of losing them than you are willing to get them. So it's not a simple one-to-one. But yes, as children, we don't always understand that, which is one of the reasons why the stipulations are laid out, because many of these people are getting married at ages younger than they have fully grasped what is important in life. And so there is protection through the community standards and the courts to make sure that no one is getting taken advantage of.
For this age is like in the teens? Is that one?
So most betrothals were usually arranged during the teen years, but the actual marriages usually happened in the late teens, 18, 19, and families were usually beginning around then. One of the things to remember is that although puberty could set in earlier, in pre-industrial worlds where food was often scarce and where work was very hard, you didn't see women becoming able to bear children until much later in life than they can now. 12 and 13-year-olds having children was very uncommon in the pre-modern world, simply because most women had not developed that physical capability just yet. But some could, but most did not. All right. 412, our final one.
If he did not write for her, you shall live in my house and be maintained for my estate throughout the duration of your widowhood. He is nevertheless liable because this clause is a condition laid down by the court.
All right. Hopefully you've all noticed the pattern that we've had here over and over again through these last, 5 Mishnayot. But I want to make sure we get a little bit of a timeline explanation on what it means to be a widow. Got colors, I'm going to use them. Her husband dies, right? That's his death. That's an H, not an A. So that's his death. She remarries.
So that's the difference.
That's when she is a widow, right? Nowadays, people tend to use the term widow almost to say, she was widowed by her first husband, blah, 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 as though it happens indefinitely. But Judaism and classical text especially says, no, you're only a widow in between the death and remarriage. And remarriage was the expectation, depending upon the age of the woman. But it was uncommon for a woman to remain single if she was of marrying age, if she was in that sort of middle life period, because she needed to support, and it would be beneficial for her to be with someone else for both her sake as well as the other person's sake. So widowhood was usually kept fairly short, but it ends when she remarries. And that's the question that we're dealing with here. So in the meantime, who's paying for her upkeep? Right? Because she's no longer married to her dead husband. So technically, you might think, again, might think means you're wrong. Technically, you might think that since she's not married to the dead guy anymore, that she has no claim on his money, for food and for clothing or even for living in the house, right? Sorry, your relationship was with him he's in the ground, you're out the door. But you're wrong. That's what the Mishnah is coming to tell us, which is to say, as long as she's not remarried, she is not kicked out of the house, and she is still maintained. However, as we're going to see, there is another reason why the remarriage and end of widowhood happens. But we're going to finish reading a little bit more before we get to that. Part 2, yeah.
Thus did the men of Jerusalem write. The men of Galilee wrote, as did the men of Jerusalem.
Okay, so basically what this little section is trying to say is that in the different sections of Israel, there were customs of how to handle this, right? So in the Jerusalem, they wrote, as we just read. And in the Galil, in the north of Israel, they also followed that same practice, which is to say, even if he didn't write it, you still maintain her until she remarries. Good. However,
the men of Judea used to write, until the heirs wish to pay you your ketubah. Therefore, if the heirs wish to, they may pay her ketubah and dismiss her.
All right, so in Judea, a forced ketubah payment by the heirs could terminate the widowhood in the sense of being able to be living off of his estate. As long as they paid her the ketubah, she had no more claim to them in Judea. Now, the halacha does not go like that. Right? That was their opinion in Judea, but the halacha, as continued afterwards, is no, you're not allowed to just say 100, 200 zuzim, go. The halacha says, as long as she needs to stay in his house, she is allowed to stay in his house and be supported until she remarries. And when she remarries, then yes, she has to go. And this has no effect on her ketubah at all. Right? The ketubah is a loan that is, not a loan, it's a promise that is to her upon his death. It is not a condition of her leaving the house. It is not meant to be extortionary of, you want your ketubah, you better get out. No, it doesn't work like that. The ketubah is a promissory note, regardless of where she is living, and she is allowed to stay and be part of his estate after his death until she needs to leave as part of a new marriage.
Does she get the ketubah?
Of course.
When she remarried?
Of course. Yeah.
Because it's her money.
It's her money, exactly. Remember, the ketubah is not charity. The ketubah is a contract, exactly. It is a promissory note that is bound against the estate of her husband. And therefore, just like if he had bought a car and he dies, the estate has to pay the car dealer and give it the rest of the money, because that was his contract that he made. He made a contract with her, he dies, the estate has to give her the money. And they're not allowed to say, well, we'll pay you when you leave. No, you have to pay. And then they can't force that payment on her as a way of forcing her out the door.
That's what the commentary said, though, was the two differences. The commentary said, we'll pay you when you leave,
right.
otherwise you get maintenance. But I thought the difference was when one they could force it on her, and the other she had to elect it, right?
But that's the point. I mean, if she chooses, they can't keep her hostage, right? If she says, I want my ketubah and I want to go,
right,
they can't stop her and say, well, if you stay, we'll take care of you and we'll give you your ketubah next year. It's easier for us, cash flow, blah, blah. No, they have to pay on demand, on her demand, and not on their demand. That's the main distinction of who's driving this decision. And in the Judea, the heirs were the ones trying to drive the decision. But in Jerusalem and the Galil, it was up to her of whether she wanted to stay or whether she wanted to go. So yeah, you're reading the commentary right.
He's an attorney.
Any other questions? Well, it's not cheating to read the commentary. The commentary is excellent. This is, I always say, the USCJ commentary that was put together many years ago when they were doing this back in the days of email. People would send emails like once a day to the Mishnah Yomit program. It is really one of the best achievements of our movement, and it's one of the ones that has received the least distribution. They should have bound this up, put it in a book, and published it years ago. But they haven't for some reason that I don't know. But it is available for free, which I do consider to be a great blessing and gift to the Jewish world, because it is a very clear and lucid commentary that doesn't really expect you to know too much else about Judaism and Jewish law, and it is a great way to get into the Mishnah if you don't already know a whole lot about it. Obviously, it's still good to have a teacher, which is why I want you to keep coming to class.
It's not on the. It's not published through the conservative website, though, right? It's on that.
It's not. It's not even hosted on the United Synagogue website easily. It is found in the archives of their email server, which you can get to if you click on the right button, or at least you could in the old version. They redid their website a couple years ago, and I haven't checked since. But the Fuchsberg, which is the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem for people who come from outside of Israel. There's also Machon Shechter, which is the yeshiva for the conservative movement that's for like Israelis who actually live in Israel. But the conservative yeshiva, which will be right near when we are in Jerusalem for our Israel trip, they are the ones who host this, much easier to find on their website. And yeah, I don't know quite why it ended up there rather than elsewhere, but I'm very grateful that it is at least still available. Good. Okay, so again, a reminder for the end of the class that next week there is no class because I'm finishing up packing that night for leaving, because we go a couple days ahead of time for the Israel trip. And we will have class again. I think we worked it out. What was it? July 17th, I think, when I come back after both trip and vacation. Good. Good. It is okay to keep studying in my absence. They'll just give you more to ask when I get back.